In the heart of the Roman Empire, there stood buildings unlike any other, colossal structures of stone and marble, rising high as a testament to the greatness and power of Rome. These amphitheaters were arenas of combat, symbols of strength, and venues for entertainment that brought together thousands. But how could an empire without modern machinery and with only simple tools construct these immense monuments that still stand to this day? What were the engineering secrets that allowed its architects and engineers to achieve such an extraordinary feat? This is not just a tale of gladiatorial combat. It is the story of brilliant minds, astonishing engineering innovations, and the use of materials unlike anything seen before. From the design of complex foundations to the lifting of massive stone blocks, this documentary reveals the genius behind the construction of the giant Roman amphitheaters. Every great building begins with an idea, but the Roman amphitheaters began with more than that, with a careful selection of location and a revolutionary material that changed the face of engineering forever. Roman engineers chose sites based on several critical factors. It wasn't just about having open space. The location had to be geologically stable and close to water sources, which were necessary to fill the arena at times or to clean it after events. But the greatest challenge was turning the idea of an oval shape into a reality on the ground. The amphitheaters were not simply circular theaters. They were complex oval structures that required precise planning. Engineers used ropes and stakes to create a perfect oval shape on the ground, a detailed blueprint upon which the entire structure would be built. The real secret behind this construction ability lay in one material: Roman concrete. It was not just a mix. It was a revolution, a blend of volcanic lime, stone aggregate, and water that produced a material unmatched in strength, which grew harder over time. Even when submerged in water, this material enabled them to cast massive, complex structures that could never have been achieved with stone alone. The first and most crucial step was laying the foundations. Imagine digging a huge trench 10 meters deep and filling it with Roman concrete. This was not merely a base, it was an artificial rock, a foundation as solid as a mountain, designed to support the enormous weight of the amphitheater for centuries. With this solid foundation and that magical material, the Romans were ready to raise the greatest entertainment structures in history. Once the strong foundations were set, the real challenge began: lifting the structure into the sky. Here lay the brilliance of Roman engineering, which relied not only on strength, but on a deep understanding of physics and load distribution. Arches were the beating heart of the Roman amphitheaters. They were not merely decorative, but served as the backbone carrying the immense weight of the entire structure. By redirecting vertical force into lateral force, the arches allowed engineers to build vast, open structures at the same time. To build these arches, workers first erected a temporary wooden framework known as scaffolding. This acted as a mold over which stone blocks were carefully placed one by one until they reached the keystone at the top, which locked the entire arch in place. Once the arch was complete, the wooden mold was removed, leaving the arch standing, tall, bearing its own weight and that of the arches above it. The choice of building materials varied according to their importance. In the lower levels and outer walls, which bore the greatest pressure, the Romans used the strong travertine stone. Meanwhile, in the inner layers and some of the subsidiary walls, they relied more heavily on Roman concrete and brick. This variety not only reduced costs, but also added strength and flexibility to the structure. Thanks to these interlocking arches, the Romans were able to build multiple tiers on top of each other, allowing for the creation of a complex network of interior corridors and staircases that ensured thousands of spectators could enter and exit within minutes. Thus, the concrete buried underground transformed into a network of open arches, carrying the story of strength and engineering genius up to the sky. Once the arches rose to form a towering structure, it was time to create the spaces that would be occupied by thousands of spectators. The design of the amphitheaters was not simply about providing seats. It was an exact reflection of the strict social hierarchy of the empire. The seating was divided into levels known as the cavea, where each seat corresponded to the status of its owner. In the lower rows, closest to the arena, were the seats of the emperor, senators, and ruling elite. The higher up one went, the less influential the social class, with the uppermost tiers reserved for the common people. This social architecture was an inseparable part of the design. At the same time, the exterior facade of the amphitheater was designed to be a symbol of Roman power. It was not just a wall, but a work of art that told a story. The columns that adorned the exterior arches displayed different architectural orders for each level. The sturdy Doric style on the ground floor, the elegant Ionic style in the middle, and finally the ornate Corinthian style at the top. This progression in elegance was not accidental. It was meant to create a sense of grandeur and architectural perfection. Between these columns and arches stood massive statues of gods and heroes, giving the building a sacred and heroic character and reminding the crowds of Rome's victories. And power. Thus, amphitheaters became more than just venues for entertainment. They became a visible facade of political power, a mirror reflecting the social order, and a legendary stage whose purpose was not only to amuse the people, but also to showcase the greatness of the empire. While the crowds enjoyed the shows from their seats, the heart of the amphitheater was alive beneath their feet. The arena floor was not just a simple surface. It was a cover hiding an entire world of secrets and complex mechanisms that made the shows spectacular and surprising. The floor of the arena was covered with a thick layer of sand, not only for protection, but also to absorb blood and make cleaning easier. But beneath this sandy layer lay the most complex system in the entire amphitheater, the hypogeum. The hypogeum was an extensive network of tunnels, secret passages, lifts, and cages used to hold wild animals and gladiators before their appearance. These tunnels were like an underground city, where hundreds of people worked in complete darkness to ensure the smooth running of the events. Using a complex system of ropes and pulleys, workers would raise cages containing wild animals to the arena level through hidden trapdoors. This technique allowed animals to appear suddenly, heightening the excitement and drama of every show, and giving the audience an unforgettable experience. Thus, the amphitheater operated on two levels, a visible one of strength and beauty, and a hidden one of mechanical genius, where every movement, every surprise appearance, and every dramatic moment was the result of careful, tireless work deep underground. Building a monument of this scale required not only architectural genius, but also an army of people working in perfect harmony. The Roman amphitheaters were not merely stone structures. They were the product of a vast, highly organized workforce using simple tools with astonishing effectiveness. This workforce consisted of thousands of people from various social classes. At the top were the architects who created the plans and oversaw every detail. Under their supervision worked skilled craftsmen, builders, sculptors, and carpenters responsible for shaping and assembling the stone. But the majority of the labor force consisted of slaves and common workers, those who carried out the hard labor digging foundations, moving massive stone blocks, and pulling ropes to operate primitive lifting machines, were the real driving force behind this colossal project. To transport these massive materials, Rome relied on a complex logistical network. Limestone was brought from distant quarries and transported via rivers and roads, then carved on site. Each stone block and each brick was a logistical journey in itself. Every step was carefully planned to ensure that materials arrived on time and in sufficient quantities to keep thousands of workers continuously employed. One of the most impressive innovations was the design for protection from the scorching sun. At the height of summer, Rome's amphitheaters would be packed with tens of thousands of spectators. and providing shade for them was essential. This is where the Valerium system came into play, a massive fabric canopy that covered the arena and the upper seating areas. Operating this canopy required enormous effort, as hundreds of skilled Roman sailors experienced in handling ropes. And sails were employed to secure, fold, and deploy it through a complex network of ropes and wooden masts fixed atop the outer wall. Thus, the greatness of the amphitheater lay not only in its stonework, but also in the ability to organize armies of people and primitive machines, and in the invention of practical solutions to environmental challenges, making these structures the greatest monuments of the empire. Once the colossal structure was built and every detail prepared, only one thing remained: to fill it with noise, blood, and drama. The Roman amphitheaters were not built for architectural beauty alone. They were theaters designed specifically to host the most brutal spectacles in history, an inseparable part of Rome's culture. A day of games in the amphitheater was an event that lasted from morning until evening, with each act designed to heighten excitement. In the early morning, animal hunts began, releasing fierce and exotic beasts from across the empire into the arena. Elephants, lions, tigers, and bears were brought from the far reaches of Asia and Africa to fight against professional hunters in violent and gruesome scenes that provoked the crowd's roars. At midday came the public executions, considered another form of entertainment. Criminals and the condemned were put to death in cruel and inventive ways, sometimes forced to reenact mythical scenes that ended with their deaths, serving as a terrifying warning to the masses. The climax came in the afternoon with gladiatorial combat. Gladiators were not just fighters, they were popular heroes trained in special schools. They had distinct fighting styles and unique weapons, such as the retiarius net fighter, who wielded a net and trident, and the heavily armored gladiator, who fought with a large sword and shield. The fights followed specific rules, but the outcome was often life or death. Sometimes the fate of the defeated gladiator was decided by the crowd with a simple gesture of the thumb. Thus, the Roman amphitheaters stood as witnesses to a stunning contradiction. At the peak of engineering brilliance, they were also stages for the most savage forms of entertainment. These buildings combined the art of architecture with the art of killing, creating a legend forever etched in the history of the Roman Empire. And if you think the Roman amphitheater was only for gladiators and animals, you have yet to see the pinnacle of Roman creativity. Thanks to their incredible hydraulic engineering, the arena could be transformed in moments from a sandy battlefield into a massive artificial lake. Naval shows or mock sea battles were among the most spectacular and rare events held in the amphitheaters. It wasn't just a simple trick. It required a complex system of water channels and valves that allowed the arena to be filled with enormous amounts of water in a short time. After that, warships, sometimes with their full crews, would enter the arena to reenact famous historical naval battles before the audience. These shows went beyond mere entertainment. They were a way for the emperor to display the greatness of his empire and its naval power. Imagine thousands of spectators watching ships move and fight right in the heart of Rome, a scene that would have been unbelievable if not for the genius of the engineers who made it possible. Alongside these water battles, the arena was also a stage for many other events. It hosted religious festivals and public celebrations, with grand parades taking place there. Sometimes large-scale combat performances were held, simulating real wars, or even theatrical plays that used the special effects available at the time. Thus, the amphitheater was not just a building, it was a multi-purpose platform, capable of hosting any kind of spectacle imaginable, making it the beating heart of the empire. It served not only to entertain, but also to reinforce the emperor's status and stand as proof of his greatness before the world. Building an amphitheater as large and beautiful as the Roman Colosseum was not merely an engineering achievement. It was also a massive economic and political project. In the absence of public funding in the modern sense, the key question was always, who paid for it? The answer lies at the very heart of Roman power, the construction of grand amphitheaters. Especially the Colosseum in Rome was financed directly from the imperial treasury. This was no random act of generosity. It was, in fact, a strategic political investment. These projects were often announced after major military victories, with war spoils and the wealth of conquered peoples used to fund their construction. In doing so, the emperor sent a clear message to his people: your strength is my strength, and your wealth is my wealth. This apparent generosity, which showcased the emperor's magnanimity, ensured the loyalty of the masses and reinforced the legitimacy of his rule. In smaller cities throughout the empire, funding took a different form. Wealthy locals and city officials would compete to finance the construction or restoration of an amphitheater. Such funding was seen as a way to gain honor, elevate social status, and immortalize one's name. The person who financed the project became a local hero and was often rewarded with a political position or lasting respect from the community. But the costs did not end with construction. The expenses of the games themselves were immense. The emperor or the local patron had to pay for everything, from purchasing exotic animals transported from the farthest corners of the empire, to the wages and training of gladiators, and even the costs of lighting, music, and special effects. There were also additional expenses, such as giving gifts and hosting feasts for the public, proving that amphitheaters were as much powerful tools of propaganda as they were venues for entertainment. Every stone in the Roman amphitheater and every drop of blood spilled in its arena told a story of money and power. These structures, with their massive financial sacrifices, stood as tangible proof of the empire's strength and its desire to dominate minds and hearts just as it dominated lands. Building a giant Roman amphitheater was a great achievement, but the greatest challenge lay in managing and preserving it for decades, even centuries. These monuments were not merely buildings, but complex institutions that required immense organizational and logistical efforts to remain operational and vibrant. The management of the amphitheater fell to appointed officials whose job was to oversee every detail, from preparing the games to maintaining the structure itself. Maintenance teams worked tirelessly, regularly inspecting the walls and arches and repairing any cracks or damage to prevent structural failure. The water used in the naval battle shows, along with the vibrations caused by the crowds of thousands, placed constant pressure on the structure. There was also a specialized team responsible for the complex mechanisms in the hypogeum beneath the arena. The lifts, pulleys, and hidden traps all required constant inspection to ensure they operated smoothly and safely, especially during critical moments in the shows. On game days, crowd management was the most prominent task. Thousands of guards were responsible for organizing the spectators' entry and directing each social class to its designated seats, as well as maintaining order inside the amphitheater. The carefully designed network of corridors and staircases allowed tens of thousands of people to enter and exit in a very short time, preventing chaos or stampedes. Although the amphitheater was a venue for entertainment, it was also a vital economic hub. Vendors sold food, drinks, and souvenirs, making game days major commercial events that required additional organization. Thus, Roman amphitheaters were managed with extreme precision, functioning like a well-oiled machine that aimed not only to entertain the masses, but also to showcase Rome's ability to control everything, from stone to crowds. The greatness of the Roman amphitheater was not eternal. Over the centuries, Rome changed, and with it, people's view of entertainment. The roar of the crowds faded, and the shouts of gladiators disappeared. signaling the dawn of a new era and the end of the age of blood and sand. The spread of Christianity was one of the key factors that led to the decline of the games. As the influence of the church grew, voices rose against the brutality of gladiator combat and animal hunts, which were seen as incompatible with Christian values. Numerous imperial decrees gradually restricted these games until they were almost entirely banned in the 5th century AD. With the political and economic decline of the Roman Empire, there were no longer enough resources to fund and maintain these colossal structures. The amphitheaters became abandoned, turning from symbols of power into crumbling ruins battling time. Yet, they were not entirely forsaken. In the Middle Ages, many amphitheaters were repurposed into multifunctional structures. Some were transformed into fortresses, with noble families using their strong walls for protection. Others became residential and commercial spaces, with houses and shops built into their arches and corridors. But perhaps the most tragic fate was their transformation into massive quarries. As Rome collapsed, the stones of the amphitheaters became an easy and cheap source of building materials. Large portions of these structures were dismantled, and their stones were used to build palaces, churches, and new buildings across the city, leading to the loss of much of their beauty and architectural detail. After once being symbols of Roman power, the amphitheaters became silent witnesses to the end of an era and raw material for a new Rome built upon the ruins of the old. After centuries of neglect and being reduced to quarries, the Roman amphitheaters were on the verge of being forgotten. But during the Renaissance, the world's view of the past changed. The human mind began to rediscover the greatness of ancient civilizations, a turning point in the life of these monumental structures. At first, the interest came from an appreciation of architectural and artistic beauty. Scholars and artists began studying these ruins not for their stones, but for the engineering and aesthetic lessons they held. Then, with the rise of modern archaeology, systematic work began at the sites. Careful excavations revealed the hidden secrets of the amphitheaters, such as the complex tunnels of the hypogeum and the mechanisms once used to lift animals, bringing back to life the stories that had played out on this ground. The amphitheater was no longer just a pile of stones. It became a witness to history. The first preservation efforts emerged, with Roman authorities issuing laws to protect what remained of these buildings from further destruction. These monuments, once theaters of death, were transformed into symbols of human heritage. In the modern era, Roman amphitheaters have gained unprecedented prestige, becoming some of the world's most famous landmarks, visited by millions every year. Under the supervision of experts and international organizations like UNESCO, careful restoration and maintenance work is now carried out to ensure their survival for future generations. Thus, after surviving neglect and the ravages of time, the amphitheaters were reborn as global cultural icons, telling the story of a great civilization and reminding us of humanity's capacity to build, destroy, and rediscover. This journey has taken us deep into the Roman Empire, from the digging of the first foundations to the deafening cheers of the crowds, from its glory to its ruins. Today, centuries later, the Roman amphitheaters still stand, not as a memory of violence and bloodshed, but as eternal testimony to human will and the ability to build. The legacy of the amphitheaters goes beyond the stone itself. These structures have left an indelible mark on our modern world. Their influence is seen in every sports stadium and grand theater built today. The concept of tiered seating, repeating arches, and the capacity to hold massive crowds all originated here, evolving to shape our contemporary landmarks. They also offer a profound historical and social lesson, showing us how political power once used entertainment to control the masses, and how even leisure spaces reflected social divisions. They serve as a mirror to ancient values, prompting us to consider the similarities and differences with our own. Asterisk. Perhaps the greatest legacy left by Roman engineers is the building material itself. Roman concrete, the foundation of these structures, which has defied time and endured for millennia. It still amazes scientists today, who are trying to unlock its secrets to create more sustainable and durable construction materials. Asterisk. Thus, these buildings have transformed theaters of death into monuments of life, from remnants of a harsh past into symbols of engineering artistry and human heritage. They remind us that the greatest human achievements can withstand the test of time, and that the story they tell goes beyond stone and earth. Asterisk. And so, we reach the end of our documentary. But before we conclude, I would like to extend my deepest thanks to each and every one of you. Your support and attention have been the cornerstone on which we built this work, and we promise to continue bringing you more stories worth telling. Until we meet again.